Γεια σας μαθητέ, and welcome to this short little lesson on Greek spelling, actually on orthography, orthographia. And one of the big questions that I get asked all the time is, what do we do about omega and omicron, the two O sounds in Greek? So I'm going to see if I can give you a couple of general tips that should come in helpful and help you eliminate some, not all, of the confusion. So, which one should be used? Well, there are a couple of things we need to know about these letters. The omega, and if we break its name down, if we separate it, it's just the omega, the mega O, which just means the big or the long O. And the omicron is just the micro O, the small o. Now, originally, there was no omega. Omega is a much younger letter than omicron. When it did come along, the intention was to save space on the page. So instead of writing a double omicron, they would remove those two spaces and just take up one with an omega, almost like almost as if an omicron was worth 50 cents and an omega was worth $1. And in ancient Greek, the length of syllables was extremely important. In modern Greek, however, they sound exactly the same, and no one felt it was necessary to consolidate them back into one letter. And they do serve an important function on the page. When we see them, they do help us understand something about the word. We call them graphemes when you need to see it in writing to understand the meaning. So how do we know which one to use? This is our question again, our essential question. Let's take a look at Omicron first. There are a lot of rules here. Neuter nouns with an O sound at the end use Omicron, like to scholio, to viβλio. And you can see that blue Omicron there. So when we use the word to, which is one of the many words for the in Hellenica, it's going to be an Omicron. When we're in the nominative or accusative cases, if you don't know what that means, don't worry about it. So we have to scholio, the school, to viβλio, the book, to tetradio. Okay, these are neuter nouns, and you'll see that they all have an omicron. To parathiro, the window. To dasos, because there are neuter words that end in os. If that last o sound, if you hear a neuter sound that has an o there, you will have to assume that it's going to be omicron most of the time. To dasos, to lathos. But to phos. So they don't always follow this pattern, but the tips I'm giving you here will work more than 99% of the time. And there is a reason why phos is spelled the way it is, but we're not going to get into it here. Another tip that you can use is the last O sound in masculine and feminine nouns is also going to be omicron. So we'll have o logos, the word or the reason. And there's another blue omicron there. That article, that word for the, is also always going to be omicron. O logos, o likos, the wolf. Orinokeros, but also orinokeros. Oh dear. Yes, this is one of the problems when you have a language as old as Greek. The general uh, rule is the older languages, the more likely it is to have irregularities, and Greek has a lot. The one that you see here in red, rinokeros, and by the way, this is the word rhinoceros, is the other accepted spelling. It's the older one, but it is still valid today. So we have to be careful, and sometimes we have to be aware of the exceptions as well. There are feminine words that end in os also, like iodos, the road, methodos is the method, periodos is the period, and where we get words like periodico, periodical, kathodos, the cathode, anodos, the anode, and others. Iatros, this is an interesting one. Iatros means the female doctor. Uh, the the interesting story here is that there were occupations at one point that were not open to women. So you had o iatros, the doctor, and it was a masculine word, and it was a job done by a man. O ithopios, the actor. O dikigoros, the attorney, the lawyer. As women came to have these jobs, the question was, what should be done to the word? And all they did was they changed the O that you saw up here, and they changed it to E. So iatros tells us that it's a feminine doctor. I odontiatros is the female dentist. Did I say the feminine doctor? The female doctor, and so on. So iatros, iodos, these are feminine words whose final vowel sound is O. We'll use the Omicron. Another one, when the last O sound in most masculine and neuter adjectives is Omicron. So, Omikros, the little one, to mikro, also the little one. When the last O sound in men's names in modern Greek, this is important, modern Greek uses Omicron, like Yorgos, George, Stephanos, Stephen or Stephen, Alexandros, and others. We also have the passive voice and deponent verbs. Now, if you don't know what those are, I do have videos here on my channel about them. Basically, these are the verbs that end in ome. So, like onomazome, I am named. Okay, that is a passive voice verb, because when I say I am named George, it doesn't tell you who it is that names me that. Okay, that's a passive voice verb. And then chriazome, which means I require, is something that looks passive, but it's actually active. And that's called a deponent verb. Or in Greek, we call them apothetica rhemata, the deponent verbs. They look passive, but they're active. When you hear that ome, it's going to be an omicron. Now, gerunds, which some people call participles, in English these are ing nouns, like walking is fun, swimming is good exercise, watching baseball is boring. Gerunds, where the O sound is not accented, that's really important, like bienondas, which just means going or while going, and thelondas. You can see that blue Omicron has no acute accent. There's no oxia on it. It's an unaccented vowel, and that'll be an Omicron. Vlepondas, seeing or while seeing. And let's take a look now at when we can use omega. In first person singular verbs where the final sound is O, like grafo, I write, diavazo, I read or I study, agapo, which is a contract verb, and there are videos here about that on this channel. Agapao became agapo, that ao became an omega. And then all of your ono verbs like kriono, I am cold, and plirono, I pay, sikono, I raise. Well, look how many omegas you have there. So whenever you have an ono word, and there are a lot of them, an ono verb, just remember to use the omega. Back to participles and gerunds, where the O sound is accented, like kratondas, holding, and perpatondas, walking, like the walking man. Notice when the O sound in that ondas is accented, it's no longer an omicron, it's now an omega. And this applies to hundreds and hundreds of verbs. It's another good tip to remember, and it'll save you a lot of grief when you're trying to spell. Colimbondas, swimming, because colimbo, colimbao becomes colibo, colibo as a participle becomes colimbondas. Your next tip is also one that pertains to names. We mentioned names in modern Greek. When the last O sound in men's names in ancient Greek is heard, we use the omega. Platon is Plato. Damon is Damon. And many of these are on names. What makes this confusing is that Iason, which is the Greek way of saying Jason, which is a Greek name, Iason is spelled with an omega, but if you use the slightly more casual form, Iasonas, that omega becomes an omicron. Cleon, which is Cleon, becomes Cleonas. So there's a lot of confusion here, but this applies to many names. I'm generally trying to avoid saying too much about names, but there is one more point I have to make. The last O sound in women's names uses the omega. Okay, so vaso, kiratso, kero, froso. Now, except for kiratso, that second one, these other ones are diminutives of longer, more formal names. So like an example of a diminutive would be having someone named John and calling him Johnny, or George and calling him Georgie, or Robert and calling him Bobby or Robbie. So Vaso, of course, is a diminutive for Vasiliki, Froso is for Efrosini, and so on. Anyway, when you hear those O, if you know someone named Maria, sometimes people might call her Mario. That O is going to be an omega. And then a very important one here, adverbs with an O sound at the end use omega. Remember, an adverb normally answers the how question, like how does she sing? She sings beautifully. How does he walk? He walks slowly, and things like that. And we get things like sinepos, asphalos, which means like definitely, certainly, kathos, which could be clearly. There are many of these. Now, not all adverbs in Greek use the os ending, but the ones that do almost always use the omega sigma. And kind of a minor one here, but it's related to one of the medical Greek and Latin episodes I recently posted. Your oma words use omega, like patoma, the floor, aetoma, which is a gable, carcinoma, carcinoma, and lots of those unfortunate medical terms. Those will use omega. Now, some of you may have run into a situation where you've had a professor of ancient Greek who's told you that modern Greek is chaotic, there are too many repetitive sounds, which is true, and modern Greek pronunciation is probably not the same as the ancient Greek one. We'll talk about that in another video. However, you might want to remind them that Greek is not the only language that has this problem of homophones. And I'll go into my second grade teacher mode and repeat something from a lesson I did years ago with second graders when I taught them, that homophones are a problem in English as well. For example, you might be in pain, P-A-I-N, Or you might have a window pane. Like a sheet of glass. Some people put fruit or honey in their yogurt. Other people like it plain, Plain. And other people fly in a plane, like an airplane, Plane. Many cities, like Ocean City, have a main street. And this guy right here has got a pretty big mane. We learned a while ago that another word for a bucket is a pail, Pail. When we sent letters to our friends in Japan, we sent them mail, Mail. And if someone is not a female, they are a male, like a boy or a man. If you really know the answer to a question, you might raise your hand. And you have to be careful when you're outside because the rays of the sun can sometimes be harmful. There's also raise, like to break down or to tear down. This is where we get the word razor, which people use to shave. And they don't always have to have a long A. For example, you can have sent, SENT, like we sent letters to friends in Japan. And the flowers have a sweet scent, SCENT. It sounds exactly the same. And if you have 1 penny, you have a cent. And if you've got more than 1 penny, you've got cents, specifically 5 cents. Now, you don't really want to carry a lot of pennies around when you could have a nickel. If you carried only pennies around, well, it wouldn't make any sense. Oh, this is getting worse. Then there's this one that always causes problems. There, and there. They're standing over there with their parents. Oh, and then we have metal, 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 and metal. These four sound exactly the same, but they have different meanings. You can look these up if you're curious. Homophones are everywhere, not just in modern Greek. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that. It was a little longer than it needed to be, but back to Omega and Omicron. Know the words and know the rules. This will help you get out of trouble a lot. If you see the word telefono, look at that ending. It ends in an omicron, which means it's probably going to be a neuter noun. To telefono is the telephone, but telefono is I call, I phone someone. It's a verb. How do we know? We look at the ending. Analogo is an analog. It almost sounds the same. But analogo is a verb. Yes, the accents are on different syllables. That helps also. So if you're a good listener, you'll pick up on that. Some people are not very careful with their accents, which does cause problems. Then we'll have words like this, homos, which means shoulder. But we also have homos, which means however. There's no connection at all between these words except for the fact that they happen to sound the same. The spelling is different, the meaning is totally different, and you could run into additional difficulty with homos, which means raw. So we have to be very careful with our words. We practice by reading, by looking words up, by asking questions, and maybe it can help us when we get stuck in situations like this one, piano. It's a verb. It means I grab. Certainly not to be confused with piano, the musical instrument, which is not even of Greek origin. Okay, I hope this has cleared things up. Good luck with your spelling. Te lo